All right. Hello, everyone. Here we are, ready. Late, very late, starting almost 10:30. But, hey, I had stuff to do, so I just barely got home, and I have to work early in the morning, so I still wanted to stream. I figured this would be the better of the two, because the other one would have been um, Resident Evil 7, and I think I'm at the finale. I don't know because I've never played through it before, but I got the feeling that I'm at the finale, and it's going to be a screaming session, so not the best time to be starting that. So, all right, we are getting into the third of the Lost Tribe of the Sith novellas, Paragon. Um, so let's just jump straight on into it. Written back in 2010. There we are. 4,985 years before the Battle of Yavin, so we've moved forward just a little bit. We've skipped forward 15 years, in fact. All right. The water was as warm as it was every day, streaming from the marble slot high on the wall down onto Sila's body. There had been no refresher, no modern conveniences for the Sith stranded on Kesh for 15 standard years, but they had learned to live with what they had. The glistening droplets of meltwater clinging to her brown skin had come from a glacier half a continent away. Kashiri Uvak flyers, their beasts laden with massive kegs, had ferried the water from that faraway place to the Sith's mountain retreat. Rooftop attendants heated the water to her exact specifications, channeling it through a system thoroughly cleansed daily from mildew and other pollutants. Below, Sela meticulously raked at her wrist with pumice brought from the foot of the Cecil Spire, kilometers away. Kashiri artists had crafted the stones into pleasing shapes for her. The natives were more interested in appearance than function, but in this they had an ally. Sela looked with her usual disdain at the stall, constructed for her personal use by her Sith brethren immediately after she'd moved into Commander Corson's chambers. The place was more a temple than a home. Well, she couldn't have everything, not here. 15 years. That's what it was by the Kashiri calendar, too, although who could trust that? She stepped dripping from the shower, wondering where the time had gone. Not to her body, she saw in the colossal mirror. Working glass was another thing the Kashiri were good at. Twice a mother and living on food suited for farm animals back home, and yet Sela looked as fit as she ever did. It had taken work, but time was one thing she'd had. "I know you're there, Tilden," Sela said. Tilden Ka, her Kashiri attendant, always stayed out of sight from the mirror, never remembering she could sense him through the Force. Now he stood by the doorway, averting his large opal eyes and presenting a robe in his shaking hands. 15 years hasn't changed him either, Sela thought, with a silent chortle as she snatched the robe. But why shouldn't he look? All that drab purple skin, to call it lavender was flattery, and white hair, the color of age and uselessness. If Kashiri had found other Kashiri beautiful before, it was only because they hadn't yet seen the Sith. And besides, it was Tilden's job to worship her, one of the younger high priests of the Kashiri faith, which recognized Sela and her fellow Sith as ancient deities from the heavens. Tilden lived to follow her everywhere. She rather enjoyed torturing him like this in the mornings. She was the sacrilege that started his day. "Your son is hunting with the riders until tonight," he said. "Your daughter is in Tav with the educators your people sent." "Fine, fine," she said, discarding the gown he'd set out in favor of a brighter one. "Get to something important." "Milady is expected in the ward this afternoon for the reviewing," he said, looking up from his parchment. Finding her fully dressed and standing before the great window, he smiled gently. "Otherwise you are at your leisure." "And the Grand Lord?" "His Eminence, our Savior from above, has begun his meetings with his advisers, the usual people, born on high like Milady. His giant friend is there too." He looked down at his notes. Oh, and the Crimson Man has asked for an audience. Crimson Man? Sela's gaze remained on the foaming ocean far below. Ravelin? Yes, milady. Then I should go. Sela stretched mightily before turning abruptly to search for her shoes. Tilden had them. They were the only articles of clothing rescued from the crash of the Omen that she continued to use. The Kashiri still hadn't figured out decent footwear. I didn't mean to turn this into a working day so early, Tilden stammered, fastening her shoes. Forgive me. Were you finished bathing? I could have the minders recycle the water. Relax, Tilden. I want to go out, she said, pinning back her dark hair with a sculpted bone clip, a gift from some local noble she couldn't remember. She paused in the polished doorway. But have the team step up the water deliveries, and have them bring it from the far side of the mountain range. It's better for the skin from over there. Sela yawned. It wasn't even high noon, and the daily pantomime was already well underway. Commander Yaru Corson, the Kashiri savior from above, sat in his old bridge chair, listening just as he used to on the command deck of Omen. But now the shattered wreck of the vessel lay behind him, sheltered in a part of the sturdy structure not used for habitation, and his battered chair was incongruously plopped in the middle of a marbled colonnade, stretching out hundreds of meters. Here, high in the open air of the Takara Mountains, recently renamed for his precious mother, wherever in Blazes she was, Corson held court. The architecture and location made for a good show for the Kashiri townsfolk, who occasionally flew up here. That was according to design, but it was also big enough to accommodate every foolish supplicant that Corson wanted to cram into his day. Sela saw Gloyd the gunner, Corson's giant friend, at the front of the line as usual. The lumpy-headed Hook's jowls quaked as he presented his latest crazed idea, using one of the surviving boring lasers that still had a charge to fire signals into space. Boring seemed to be the right word to Sela, and Corson didn't appear enthralled either. How long must Gloyd have been prattling before she arrived? It'll work this time, Gloyd said, mottled skin sweating. All we've got to do is get the attention of a passing freighter, an observatory, anything. He wiped his forehead. Sela never thought the genetic lottery had been kind to Hooks to begin with, but now it looked as if age and sun were causing Gloyd's hide to melt from his skull. The intensity will dissipate to the inverse of the square of the distance from Kesh, came a human voice from behind Corson. Para, Omen's relief navigator and now their main science advisor, stepped forward. It'd be just more galactic background noise. Didn't they teach you anything where you came from? Probably not, Sela mused. Gloyd had been a castaway even before he joined the Omen crew. While other outsiders avoided the Stygian caldera, Gloyd's team of brigands had figured something truly amazing must be there. There was, the Sith Empire. Few of Gloyd's companions had survived the discovery, but as gunner and foot soldier, he'd done combat with Jedi plenty of times in his early life, making him useful to Nagasedo and later to Yaru Corson. But lately, not so much. I don't think it's going to work, old friend, Corson said, spying Sela out of the corner of his eye and winking. And we just can't run the risk of burning out any more equipment. You know the score. They all did. Even as they built their stone shelter for Omen in the months after the crash, the crew had steadily brought out equipment. Some of it they expected to restore to life with a few fabricated parts. The rest was immediately usable, and used. That had been a mistake. It turned out there wasn't any metal to be found on Kesh. The Sith had ripped and clawed at the surface, expending most of their surviving munitions to no avail. Above Kesh was pleasing to the eye, but below it appeared to be little more than a dirt ball. Much equipment running on internal power sputtered and died. Worse, something in Kesh's electromagnetic field was playing hob with everything from radio waves to electrical generation. The lightsabers still worked, thank the lignin crystals for that, but the castaways Intrepid as they were at cannibalizing, weren't going to be able to reinvent anything. The tools simply weren't here. I get that, Gloyd said, seeming not so tall as before. You know me, I'm built for battle. This peaceful paradise is getting to me. I know something you can do battle with, Sela said, her kaftan shimmering as she stepped up and put her arm around Corson. I think I saw them preparing lunch back in the main hall. Corson smiled. Gloyd glared at the couple for a moment before letting loose with a churning laugh. What can I say, he said, patting his paunch and turning. The lady knows me. Corson looked past the retreating hulk to see another figure. Ravelin, what's your next grand plan to get us off this rock? Nothing along those lines, Ravelin said. The crimson man of Tilden's description stepped forward and regarded his leader civilly. Not today. Really? Well, we're all getting older. The mind forgets. Not this one, Commander. Ravelin ran his finger along his right cheek tendril, an expression of thoughtfulness among the red Sith. It made Sela's skin crawl. She gripped Corson tighter. One-time quartermaster for Omen's complement of Massassi warriors, Ravelin had been left without a mission after his charges died during their first days on Kesh. Since then, he'd held a sequence of odd jobs. More importantly, he'd become the spokesbeing for the 57, the surviving crew members whose bloodlines to the red-skinned Sith species ran truest, and for those who, like Gloyd, were less interested in living on Kesh than leaving it. But Ravelin's lot had grown increasingly bleak. His people hadn't numbered 57 since their arrival. A dozen had fallen due to accident or professional incompetence, and none of the children of Ravelin's people had lived a day. Kesh had not been kind in equal measure to all its guests. As motives for wanting to leave went, his were fairly strong. But they did not bring him before Corson today, apparently. There's something else, Ravelin said, eyeing Sela. People in the service of your wife have been trying to document the ancestries of all our crew. They have grown quite insistent, he added, cocking an eyebrow stalk. Feeling Sela's grip tighten further, Corson rose. Your people don't have to worry about that, Rav. Human crew only. Yes, but many of us have at least some human blood, Ravelin said, walking along the colonnade with Corson. The crowd parted, Sela walking gingerly behind. And many of your people have some of ours. The merger of the dark Jedi line with that of my Sith forebears is an article of pride to our people, Corson. To have someone picking it apart. Corson continued walking, enjoying the view of the ocean. Strands of silver in his hair glistened in the sun. Sela stepped up her pace to get closer. It's still a foreign planet, Corson said. We don't know what killed your Massassi when we landed. We don't know what's been happening to, well, you know. I certainly do, Ravelin said, looking out at the ocean without seeming to see it. His color had faded to a somber maroon hue in his time on Kesh, and his earrings and other Sithly ornamentation only served to make the man beneath look more drab. This is a world driven by tragedy, Corson, for all of us. If you'd accept one of my people in the creche as midwife, we might be better able to understand. No, Sela said, interposing herself between the two. They're not medical personnel, Corson. In conditions like these, we've got to have some controls. Ravelin shrank back. It was not a slight, Sela. Your staff have done quite well since our mission turned. Generational in nature. The Sith thrive. His face wrinkled with age and worry softened. It should be so for all of the Sith. Sela looked urgently at Corson, who waved his hand dismissively. Dismissing us both, she wondered. We'll talk about it later, Corson said. Was there something else? Ravelin paused. Yes. I will be in the south, as you requested, visiting the towns of the Ragnos Lakes. Sela knew the project. The Kashiri had been harvesting some kind of fluorescent algae, and Corson had assigned Ravelin to check it out. for potential use in lighting the Sith structures. There are 8 villages on various bodies of water, all the different specimens to examine. That's a lot of territory, Corson said. You alone? As you requested, Ravelin said. I start in Tetsubal, farthest away. Sela smiled. It was just the sort of mindless job that would drive the quartermaster to madness. Take your whole retinue, Corson said, slapping a firm hand on Ravelin's shoulder. Corson had grown no more physically imposing during his exile, but he still walked like a man Gloyd's size. It's important, and it'll go faster if you split up, and you could all stand to get off the mountain for a few days. He brought Ravelin closer and spoke into his sunken ear. And look, next time Sela would like you to call me Grand Lord. That's just a name for the Kashiri, and there are Kashiri here. It's an order, Rav. Safe flight. Sela watched as Ravelin limped off. He'd lost an argument with an Uvak in their 2nd year here. It was one of a series of losses, and she wasn't about to let him win an argument now. She took Corson aside. Don't you dare accept any of his people in my wards. You're pretty when you're territorial. Corson! He looked at her with piercing eyes. You're not living on Relg anymore. How long before you let go of the past? Sela let a smoldering look speak for her, but Corson ignored it. Spotting something behind her, he grinned and turned to address the waiting crowd. Sorry to cut this short, all of you, but I see my lunch companion has arrived. Sela turned. Adari Val waited at the edge of the plaza. So that's chapter 1. We're going to go on into chapter 2. The Sith Empire of Sela's youth was a nest of star systems linked by common heritage, ambition, and greed. And it was also, in a sense, a black hole from which little escaped. The Stygian caldera's limiting effects on hyperspace travel were disproportionate, making it far easier for unlucky outsiders to wander into Sith space than for the Sith Lords to venture out. Those who found their way in seldom returned, becoming slaves to one princeling or another. The arrivals frequently changed hands over the generations, forgetting their homes completely. They too were of the Sith now. Some Sith Lords, such as Naga Sado, saw value in the work of the descendants of the original Tapani refugees, where their tentacle-faced masters with lineages back to the Sith species were more interested in sorceries. Sela's people excelled at science. When allowed to practice, they did, forming the industrial and medical infrastructures for several lords. Some even resolved problems of lightsaber crystal fabrication and power generation that had eluded the Jedi of the Republic. Such feats were never heralded. No Sith Lord would share a new weapon. If failure was an orphan, success for the Sith was a secret love child. The child Sela had her own successes, serving on Relg with the rest of her family in the forces of Ludo Kresh, Sado's greatest rival. At 13, Sela was already a talented healer, drawing both on the Force and the medical knowledge of her forebears. Devotion had already borne fruit. We are advancing in this movement, her father had said. You have done well, and it has been rewarded. Glory in the honor, Sela. It is the greatest that can befall such as us. She had been charged with the care of old Lord Kresh's feet. They were out all afternoon again, the two of them. Tilden had told her that, and Sela had other confidants who provided regular reports. Corson and the Kashiri woman would stroll the pathways painstakingly carved out of the once treacherous mountainside, discussing what? Not a blasted lot, as far as she could tell. Their walks dated from the beginning of Sela's own relationship with Corson. Back then, there had been a need. The Val woman had discovered the Sith on the mountain and had acted as intermediary with the Kashiri. But as years progressed and the need for a single ambassador ebbed, the walks continued, ranging ever farther away. After the birth of Sela and Corson's daughter, Nida, The walks had become daily, including the occasional Uvok flight. Sela knew enough from her sources not to suspect infidelity, as if she would care, but the native woman had taken steps to improve her plain appearance. She'd recently begun turning up in Vorshandi face markings, a decoration unheard of for a Kashiri widow of an Uvok rider. But eavesdroppers confirmed that the generally mindless substance of their discussions hadn't changed. Where does the sun go at night, Corson? Is air part of the Force, Corson? Why are rocks not food, Corson? If she was a spy, she was pretty useless at it, but she did have command of a huge chunk of the Grand Lord's time, and more. She's really something, isn't she? He had asked in an unguarded moment after Adari flew back to Tav one evening. I think your standards for playthings have plummeted, Sela had responded. Along with my ship. And my real husband, she had not said. Sela thought back at that moment now as she stood outside the ward. 15 years with her beloved husband's hated brother. 15 years with the man who had probably orphaned her son. Let the old purple wraith have him, she thought. The less seen of Yaru Corson, the better. Corson's seduction of Sela had not taken long at all. Once she'd convinced him he'd been met with something other than a dagger. He'd be met with something other than a dagger. It was an acceptable arrangement on both sides. By winning her approval, the commander had solidified his bonds with the restive miners his ship was carrying, and stripped away anything that had belonged to his hated sibling. So she even let him think it was his idea, though she bit her lip to ribbons that first year. For her part, Sela won power and influence in the new order, benefits going far beyond convenient morning ablutions. Little Jariad would be raised in the best lodgings wherever they were, first in the walled native city of Tav, later in the mountain compound. And she had a job. Administration of the Sith sick wards seemed like a worthless sinecure given the rude health of the Kashiri pampered people. Certainly no one else wanted the assignment, not with a world to conquer and an interstellar escape to engineer. Most Sith injured in disagreements never reached a healer anyway. But Sela got to know more about the Sith who were stranded on Kesh than anyone, including the Omen officer originally responsible for keeping the ranks. She knew who was born and when and to whom, and that was the balance of power. The others weren't even looking. Their eyes were still on the sky, on getting out. Only Corson seemed to understand that they might be settling into a permanent situation, though he clearly worked to prevent anyone but Sela from sensing it. She didn't understand why he had been open with her about it. Perhaps the wife of Yaru Corson didn't merit hope. No matter, she didn't need it anyway. She saw the future. Here in the assembly yard behind the ward, as she walked through on her periodic reviews, here the youth of the Sith reported to see her, or rather, to be seen. This is Ebia Tidel, daughter of the miner Nafjan and the bridge cadet Kanika. Sela's willowy aide, Orlenda, stood behind a stern-faced pink child and read from a parchment. 8 years old next month by our counting. No ailments. Sela's hand closed in a V around the young girl's chin. Sela looked left and right, inspecting the child like livestock. High cheekbones, she said, mashing her index finger against the youngling's face. The child didn't flinch. I know your parents, girl. Are you a source of despair to them? No, Lady Sela. This is good. And what is your duty? To be like you, milady. Not the answer I had in mind, but I won't argue. Sela said, releasing the child and turning to Orlenda, her aide. I don't see any flaring of the skull, but I'm concerned about her coloring, she said. Too florid. Check the genealogy again. She might yet have a family if we choose properly. With a pat on the rear from Orlenda, 8-year-old Ebia Tidel returned to play in the outer yard, momentarily safe in the knowledge that her life might not be a genetic dead end. It was an important matter, Sela thought, as she watched the younglings duel with wooden staffs. Every child there had been born since the crash landing. Apart from the infusion of youth to the Sith population, it appeared that very little had changed. Every color from humanity's spectrum had been represented in the original Omen crew, and that continued to be the case. None of the casual pairings with Kashiri had produced any offspring whatsoever. Sela thanked the dark side for that, and of course there was the problem with Ravelin's people. The number of relatively pure-blooded humans had been steadily increasing. So had the purity of that blood. She had seen to that, with Corson's full approval. It was sensible. Kesh had killed the Massassi. If it had not killed humans yet, then the Sith needed more humans. Adapt or die, Corson had said. There were several more younglings on the list for this week, Orlando said. Did you want to see them today, Sela? I'm not in the mood. Is there anything else? Orlando rolled up her parchment and shooed the remaining children to the exercise yard. Well, she said, we'll need a new Kashiri bearer for the wardroom. What happened to the last one, Orlando? Sela smirked. Did you finally kill him with your kindness? No, he's dead. The big one? Gossam? Gorham, Orlando said with a sigh. Yes, he died last week. We'd loaned him to Ravelin's team, breaking down one of the decks of Omen, looking for whatever it is they look for to use. Gorham was, well, you remember, so strong. Get to it. I guess he'd been moving heavy plates, and it's hot up there under that roof. He keeled over right outside the ship. Orlando clicked her tongue. She'd thought the Kashiri were made of stronger stuff. Still, it was a good chance to rib her lusty friend. I imagine you wept at the funeral pyre. No, they tossed him over the cliff, Orlando said, straightening her flaxen hair. It was that day with the high winds. Just before dusk, Sela found Corson again on the plaza. The Kashiri woman was gone, and Corson was looking at himself, or rather at a pretty bad replica. Crafters from Tav had just delivered a 4-meter tall, not very likeness of their savior, sculpted from an enormous slab of glass. It's a first pass, Corson said, sensing her arrival. Clearly, Sela thought it would befoul the killing fields of Asha's Ree, but her Kashiri aide thought it was marvelous, at a minimum. It's positively stupendous, milady, Tilden said. Something truly worthy of the Skyborn, I mean, the Protectors. He corrected himself quickly in the presence of the Grand Lord, but still seemed to swallow hard at the new word, so recently added to the religion of his birth. Ravela's cousin, the cyborg Hestus, had worked for years with other linguists from the Omen to plumb the oral histories of the Kashiri. They sought any hint that anyone had ever happened by, anyone who might return to Kesh again, to provide them escape. They hadn't found much. The Neshtavar, the Uvok riders who, until recently, had ruled the planet, had layered their religion of the Skyborn and the opposing other side over earlier tales of protectors and destructors. The destructors periodically returned to rain disaster upon Kesh. The protectors were destined to stop them once and for all. Corson, now at the focus of the Kashiri faith, had claimed a moment of revelation and decreed a return to the old names. That, like much else over the years, had been Sela's idea. The Neshtavar had considered themselves the sons of the Skyborn, but no living Kashiri could claim kinship to the distant protectors. Whatever status any native previously enjoyed was gone, and now Sela saw the Kashiri were showing their respect with bug-eyed slabs of glass. They'd better learn to get our faces right before they respect me, Sela thought. It's not that it looks bad, she said once Tilden had stepped away. It's that it doesn't look right here. Thinking again of moving us from the mountain? Corson smiled, wind-cracked wrinkles darkening in the shadows. I think we wore out the Kashiri's patience when we stayed in Tav the first time. And what difference does that make? None. He grabbed her hand, surprising her. Listen, I want to tell you how much I appreciate the work you've been doing in the ward. It's everything I hoped, everything I knew you were capable of. Oh, I don't think you know what I'm capable of. Corson looked away and laughed. Well, let's not pursue that. Would dinner interest you instead? His eyes shone. Sela recognized the look. The man was capable as ever of keeping multiple sets of accounts. Before she could answer, a shout came from above. Corson and Sela looked at the watchtower. No attacker threatened. The Sith had purged the range of predators years before. Instead, sentries simply sat in meditation, listening to the Force for messages from Sith traveling in the far-flung reaches of the land. "It's Ravelin," called down a young red-faced sentry, only a child when Omen crashed. "Something has happened in Testable. Something bad." Corson looked up in aggravation. He could feel something in the Force, too, something chaotic, but he had no idea what. This was exactly why they shouldn't have pirated their personal communicators in an earlier escape scheme. Sela looked up at the tower and mouthed, Is Ravelin dying?" "No," the herald said, barely catching her words. "Everyone else is." And that is the end of that chapter. We're going to leave it off there, and I will finish up. There are only 2 more chapters, so I'll finish this up on the next reading, which will be Monday. So, for Star Wars anyway. So, I will see you all then. I am not going to try to do the gaming stream tonight. I'm just going to chill and get to bed early because I have to work early. So, let's see if there's anybody around to raid. Let's see. Well, we've got Zeuswood, Hot Dog Raw Dog. I'm going to go to him because he was in my stream the other night and it died on me. Right when he was telling me, "Hey, dude, it looks like there's something wrong with your stream," and then I lost internet. So we'll go over and raid him, and he's only got 2 people there right now, so we'll add a couple more to him. And I will see you all over there.
It's been great with Dave here. He's got a Pilates class. Now remember, ladies,